The air in the 80th floor penthouse was worth more than most people's homes, but that afternoon, it was thick with the suffocating weight of grief and greed. A pen worth more than a car hovered over a contract that could move mountains of money, $4.8 billion to be exact. For the recently widowed billionaire Kalen Beaumont, this signature was meant to be the final, heartbreaking act of love for his late wife, a legacy sealed in ink. The lawyers smiled, the cameras were ready. But then from the shadows of the vast room, a voice, a whisper from the one person no one would ever expect. His wife's maid. 4 simple words that would ignite a war. And what Kalen Beaumont did next wasn't just unexpected. It was an explosion that would shatter everything. The penthouse felt like a mausoleum. Sunlight, usually a welcome guest in Kalen Beaumont's New York City apartment overlooking Central Park, seemed intrusive today, glinting off the cold marble floors and glass walls with a sterile indifference. It had been 6 months since Isabella passed, and the silence she left behind was louder than any city noise. Kalen, a man whose sharp gaze could dissect a hostile takeover in minutes, now found his focus blurred. At 55, his hair was more salt than pepper, and new lines had etched themselves around his eyes, not from age, but from sorrow. He stared at the document on the polished mahogany table. The Isabella Beaumont Legacy Trust. It sounded so noble, so perfect. His oldest friend and personal attorney, Jeffrey Walsh, sat opposite him, his expression a carefully curated mask of solemn support. Jeffrey was a man built of soft edges and expensive suits, his voice a low, reassuring hum that had calmed Kalen through decades of market crashes, corporate battles, and now, the deepest personal loss. "It's the right thing to do, Kalen," Jeffrey said, his tone gentle. "It's what she would have wanted. Her name, championing the arts and medical research for generations to come. Your controlling shares in Beaumont Industries will be the engine of that legacy." Kalen nodded, though the motion felt heavy, disconnected. The plan was simple, elegant in its supposed altruism. He would transfer his majority stake, the very heart of the empire his father had built and he had quadrupled, into this new trust. Jeffrey, as the executor, would manage it alongside a board Kalen had approved. It was a way to step back, to let his wife's memory do good in the world while he hadn't figured that part out yet. Float, probably. Disappear into the quiet grief that was his only constant companion. 2 other lawyers from Jeffrey's firm, a junior partner named Fiona Davenport and a senior counsel, were present as witnesses. Fiona, sharp and ambitious, watched him with an unnerving intensity, her smile just a little too bright. "Everything is in order, Mr. Beaumont," she chimed in. "The transfer is seamless. Once you sign, the trust is officially capitalized." Kalen picked up the pen, a vintage Mont Blanc that Isabella had given him for their 10th anniversary. Its weight was familiar, but today it felt like an anchor. He uncapped it, the small click echoing in the cavernous room. His eyes scanned the signature line. Kalen R. Beaumont, a name that meant power, a name that was about to see that power in the name of love. He took a breath, the scent of expensive leather and Jeffrey's cologne filling his lungs. He lowered the nib to the paper. The ink was a hair's breadth from the page, and then he heard it. It wasn't a shout. It was barely a sound at all, a ghost of a word breathed into the space behind him. "Don't!" Kalen froze. He didn't turn his head. He knew that voice. It was Serafina Jones. She had been Isabella's personal housekeeper, and, in the final years of her illness, her caregiver and confidant. Serafina was a woman of quiet dignity, always present but never intrusive, her movements as silent as a shadow. In all the years he'd known her, he'd never heard her speak out of turn. Jeffrey shifted, his chair creaking. "Is everything all right, Kalen?" Kalen's gaze remained fixed on the contract. He could feel Serafina's presence behind him, a pocket of stillness in the tense room. He saw her in his periphery, standing by the doorway to the kitchen, holding a silver tray with a glass of water he hadn't asked for. Her face was impassive, but her eyes, dark and deep, were locked on him with a desperate urgency. Then the whisper came again, so low only he could possibly have caught it. "Don't sign this." His heart, which had felt numb for months, gave a painful thud. It was absurd. A maid telling a billionaire not to sign a $4.8 billion document crafted by his most trusted friend. It was illogical, insane. Yet it came from the one person in this room, other than himself, who had truly loved Isabella without condition. Serafina had been the one to brush Isabella's hair when she was too weak, to read to her when her eyes failed, to hold her hand through the long, painful nights. Her loyalty was not to Beaumont Industries or its stock price. It was to the woman he was trying to honor. Fiona Davenport cleared her throat, a small, impatient sound. "Mr. Beaumont?" Kaylin's mind raced. What did she know? What could she possibly know that his team of high-powered lawyers didn't? To refuse to sign now would be a monumental scene. It would be an insult to Jeffrey, an act of inexplicable paranoia. It would create a crisis. But the look in Serafina's eyes, it wasn't madness. It was a warning, a profound, terrified warning. He had two choices: trust the man he'd called a brother for 30 years, or trust the silent woman who had guarded his wife's final secrets. Kaylin Beaumont, the man who had built a career on calculated risks and gut feelings, slowly, deliberately, placed the cap back on his pen. The click was deafening. He stood up, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the table. He looked at Jeffrey, forcing a weary smile. "You know what, Jeffrey? I can't. Not today." Jeffrey's affable mask slipped for a fraction of a second. A flicker of something, anger, panic, crossed his face before being replaced by practiced concern. "Kaylin, what's wrong? Are you feeling unwell?" "I'm just tired," Kaylin lied, running a hand over his face. "Looking at her name on that paper? It's harder than I thought. I need a day, just a day to clear my head." Fiona Davenport's smile was gone completely now, replaced by a tight, unreadable line. She exchanged a look with Jeffrey, a micro-expression so quick Kaylin would have missed it if his senses weren't suddenly screaming at him. "Of course, Kaylin," Jeffrey said, his voice smooth as silk again. "Completely understandable. We can reconvene tomorrow, or the day after, whenever you're ready." "Thank you," Kaylin said, his voice hoarse. "I appreciate the understanding. Please see yourselves out. I need some quiet." He didn't watch them leave. He walked to the vast window, his back to the room, and stared down at the city below, its endless energy a stark contrast to the sudden, cold dread coiling in his stomach. He heard the hushed packing of briefcases, the soft click of the penthouse door closing. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't empty. It was filled with a single, terrifying question. He stood there for a full 5 minutes before he turned. Serafina was still there, by the kitchen door, the untouched tray still in her hands. Her face was etched with relief, but also fear. "Serafina," Kaylin said, his voice barely above a whisper, "you have my complete and undivided attention. You better have a damn good reason for what you just did." The formal living room, a space designed for entertaining presidents and princes, now felt like an interrogation chamber. Kaylin stood by the fireplace, the cold, unlit marble a reflection of his own inner turmoil. Serafina stood in the center of the room, her hands clasped in front of her, her uniform immaculate. She was not intimidated by the grandeur of her surroundings. Her focus was solely on the man before her. "A reason, Mr. Beaumont," she began, her voice steady now, imbued with a quiet strength that belied her station. "I don't have a reason that a lawyer would accept. I don't have proof that would stand up in a courtroom. All I have is a promise." Kaylin's brow furrowed. "A promise? To whom?" "To Mrs. Beaumont," Serafina said, her gaze unwavering. "To Isabella." The name hung in the air between them, a sacred thing. Kaylin felt a pang in his chest. "What promise?" Serafina took a deep breath. "About a month before she passed, she knew the end was near. We all did. She was lucid, very clear. She called me to her bedside one night. Everyone else was asleep. She made me promise something. She said, 'Sarah, they're going to talk about legacy. They're going to talk about trusts and charities. It will all sound wonderful. But when the time comes for Kaylin to sign anything that gives up control of what he's built, you must stop him, whatever it takes.'" Kaylin stared at her, disbelief warring with a creeping sense of dread. Isabella said that? Why? Why wouldn't she want a foundation in her name? She was the most charitable person I've ever known. She was, Serafina agreed, and she knew you would want to honor her that way. That's what worried her. She said your love for her would be the tool they would use to blind you. They, Kalen's voice was sharp. Who is they? Serafina hesitated, for the first time looking down at her hands. She didn't trust Mr. Walsh. The words hit Kalen like a physical blow. Jeffrey? That's impossible. He's been my friend for 30 years. He was our friend. He cried at her funeral. Tears are easy for some men, sir, Serafina said softly. Mrs. Beaumont was a brilliant woman, not just with art and music, but with people. She could read the notes that people played and the ones they kept silent. She started to feel a dissonance with Mr. Walsh a few years ago. Small things. What small things? Kalen pressed, his mind refusing to accept it, yet demanding the details. Comments he would make when he thought she wasn't paying attention, about how he was the real architect of your success. Jokes about how one day he'd be the one living in the penthouse. He'd say them with a smile so you'd dismiss them. But she never did, Serafina explained. Then there were the documents she would sometimes ask him for, financial reports from the secondary holdings. He'd delay, bring her summaries instead of the raw data. He told her she didn't need to worry her pretty head about it. That was his first mistake. He underestimated her. Kalen sank into a plush armchair, his head in his hands. He tried to remember. Had Jeffrey said those things? Maybe. In jest. It was just Jeffrey's way, a bit of boastful humor. Wasn't it? She didn't tell me, Kalen murmured. Why didn't she tell me? Because she had no proof, Serafina said, her voice filled with empathy. And because she knew how much you valued his friendship. She would have been accusing your brother. She didn't want to cause you that pain, especially when she was already so ill. So she watched, and she worried. She told me Jeffrey's ambition has turned into a sickness, Sarah. Greed is a cancer too. That's why she made me promise. She knew I would be here, in the background, when the time came. The scene from an hour ago replayed in Kalen's mind, but with a new filter. The flicker in Jeffrey's eyes. The way Fiona Davenport's smile had vanished. Their shared, fleeting glance. It wasn't just impatience. It was the look of co-conspirators whose plan had just hit a snag. He felt a wave of nausea. Could his entire world be built on such a profound lie? 30 years of friendship, of shared triumphs and private pains. Was it all a performance? What do you believe he is doing, Serafina? Kalen asked, his voice low. I don't know the specifics, sir. I'm just a housekeeper, she said honestly. But Mrs. Beaumont believed that if Mr. Walsh ever got control of your assets through a structure like this trust, he would find a way to bleed it dry. He would use her name for his own gain. It would not be her legacy. It would be his monument, built on the ruins of yours. The conviction in her voice was absolute. She wasn't lying. She was relaying the final will and testament of the woman she had served with unwavering devotion. A will that wasn't written on paper, but entrusted to a loyal heart. Kalen looked up at her. The quiet maid he'd barely noticed for years was suddenly the most important person in his life. The lighthouse in a storm he hadn't even known was raging around him. He had dismissed her whisper as madness, but now he understood it was an act of incredible courage. She had risked her job, her reputation, everything, on a promise to a dead woman. He rose from the chair, a new fire kindling in his eyes, burning away the fog of grief. The sorrow was still there, but it was now alloyed with a cold, hard anger. All right, Serafina, he said. I believe you, which means I believe my wife. He walked over to his desk and picked up his phone. Jeffrey thinks I need a day to clear my head. He's right, but I won't be mourning. I'll be preparing for war. He scrolled through his contacts, past world leaders and fellow titans of industry, until he found a name he hadn't called in 3 years. A young man he'd once funded, a prodigy in a field far from his own. He pressed the call button. It rang twice. Nate, it's Kalen Beaumont. I have a problem. I need you to be my ghost. I need you to dig into the life of a man who is supposed to be my best friend, and I need you to do it without leaving a single footprint. Nathaniel Nate Chen operated out of a nondescript loft in Brooklyn that looked more like a server farm than a home. Wires snaked across the floor, and a constellation of monitors cast a pale blue glow on his face. Nate was a digital phantom, a former white hat hacker whose cybersecurity startup Kalen had personally seeded years ago. He was a genius Kalen had bet on, and now Kalen was cashing in his chips. "Jeffrey Walsh," Nate said, his voice a calm hum over the secure line. His fingers flew across a keyboard. "Partner at Walsh, Davenport and Finch. Sterling reputation. Manages one of the biggest private client portfolios in the state. On the board of half a dozen major charities. Clean. Very clean." "No one is that clean, Nate," Kalen replied, pacing his home office. He'd given Serafina the rest of the day off, wanting her far away from the storm that was about to break. "Isabella saw something. I need you to find what she saw." "Visible light is easy. I work in the shadows," Nate said. "Give me 48 hours to do a deep passive scan. Financials, communications, associations. I'll look for the tells, the digital tells." While Nate descended into the ones and zeros of Jeffrey Walsh's life, Kalen had to play the most difficult role of his career, the grieving, indecisive billionaire. The next morning, a lavish bouquet of white lilies arrived from Jeffrey, with a card expressing his deepest sympathies and understanding. It was a move so perfectly pitched, so cloyingly sincere, it made Kalen's stomach churn. He called Jeffrey that afternoon. "Jeff, thanks for the flowers," Kalen said, injecting a note of weary gratitude into his voice. "I'm still not feeling up to it. This has just knocked me sideways." "Kalen, my friend, take all the time you need." Jeffrey's voice was like warm honey. "The paperwork isn't going anywhere. Your well-being is what matters. Fiona and I were just worried about you. She looks up to you immensely, you know." "She's probably your partner in crime," Kalen thought. But he said, "She's a sharp girl. You've trained her well." The cat and mouse game was excruciating. Kalen had to act broken, pliable, while every fiber of his being screamed with rage and betrayal. He forced himself to recall conversations, dinners, shared vacations with Jeffrey. He re-examined every memory through the lens of Serafina's warning, the friendly jabs about who was smarter, the casual envy over a new acquisition, the way Jeffrey always seemed to position himself as the indispensable advisor. It all looked different now, darker. Meanwhile, in their gleaming midtown office, Jeffrey Walsh and Fiona Davenport were growing tense. "He's stalling," Fiona said, standing before Jeffrey's desk. Her usual composure was frayed. "An emotional block? I don't buy it. This is Kalen Beaumont. He doesn't let emotion derail a multi-billion-dollar decision he's already made." "Grief does strange things to a man," Jeffrey countered, though his own unease was palpable. "Isabella was his anchor. Without her, he's adrift." "Or he's suspicious," Fiona shot back. "That maid, Serafina, she was standing right there. Did you see her face? What if she said something?" Jeffrey scoffed. "Please, she's part of the furniture. Kalen wouldn't listen to a servant over me. It's unthinkable." But even as he said it, a seed of doubt was planted. He had always seen Serafina as invisible, a non-entity. It was a blind spot, and blind spots were dangerous. "We need to push," Fiona insisted. "Gently. Remind him of the tax implications of delaying, the market fluctuations. We need to create a sense of urgency that overrides this emotional paralysis." "Agreed," Jeffrey nodded. "I'll arrange a lunch, a friendly affair. I'll bring up the board's eagerness to see the trust finalized. Frame it as honoring Isabella's memory before the end of the fiscal year." They were circling, their strategy shifting from sympathy to subtle pressure. They believed they were managing a grieving friend. They had no idea they were prodding a sleeping lion. 48 hours later, Nate called back. The line was encrypted, the connection bouncing through a dozen proxies. "Okay, Kalen, I'm in." Nate's voice was grim. "The surface is spotless, as expected. His public financials are immaculate. But I found a thread." "Go on," Kalen said, gripping the phone. "Jeffrey Walsh and Fiona Davenport are not just colleagues. They are partners in a series of offshore shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands and Panama. Names like Aurelian Holdings and Silver Arch Ventures. all established within the last 2 years. Kalen's blood ran cold. What are they for? On paper, they're investment vehicles, but they don't invest. They acquire debt. Specifically, they buy distressed corporate debt for pennies on the dollar. And I found the source of their seed money, a series of consulting fees paid out from a subsidiary of Beaumont Industries, a subsidiary that Jeffrey convinced you to set up 3 years ago for emerging market exploration. The payouts were authorized by him, using a power of attorney clause you signed over to him. It was happening. The abstract warning from Serafina was now crystallizing into concrete facts. Jeffrey had been stealing from him, right under his nose. That's the appetizer, Kalen, Nate continued, his voice dropping lower. Here's the main course. I got a peek inside the draft charter for the Isabella Beaumont Legacy Trust. Not the summary they gave you. The full 400-page beast. It's a masterpiece of predatory legal work. Explain, Kalen commanded. The public-facing clauses are all about charity, but buried in the bylaws in sections of dense legalese are the real mechanics. The trust is empowered to leverage assets to maximize philanthropic outreach. That's the key phrase. It gives the executor, Jeffrey, the authority to take out massive loans against the Beaumont Industries shares. He can essentially mortgage your company to the hilt. And where does that loan money go? Kalen asked, already knowing the answer. It gets invested in high-yield offshore opportunities for the trust's growth. In other words, he's going to funnel billions in borrowed money directly into his own shell companies. He'll bankrupt the trust, default on the loans, and the creditors will seize the Beaumont shares. He walks away with billions in cash, and your company gets carved up and sold for parts. Your legacy and Isabella's name will be attached to the single largest philanthropic fraud in history. Kalen was silent. The sheer audacity, the depth of the betrayal was breathtaking. Jeffrey wasn't just planning to steal from him. He was planning to salt the earth, to burn everything Kalen had ever built, and defile his wife's memory in the process. Nate, Kalen said, his voice dangerously quiet. I don't just want proof. I want a confession. I want to see the look on his face when he realizes he's been caught. But I can't show my hand yet. What do you have in mind? Nate asked. A slow, cold smile spread across Kalen's face. Jeffrey wants to play the concerned friend. Fine, I'll be the broken man he thinks I am. And Serafina, I think it's time she delivered another message from my wife. Kalen summoned Serafina back to the penthouse the next morning. The air between them was different now. They were no longer master and servant, but co-conspirators, bound by a shared loyalty to Isabella. Nate Chen has confirmed everything, Kalen told her, outlining the scheme Nate had uncovered. The shell corporations, the debt leveraging clauses, the whole predatory architecture. Serafina listened without a change in expression, her stillness a testament to her resolve. It was as if she were hearing a confirmation of a truth she'd already felt in her bones. She knew, she said simply. Her spirit knew he was a wolf. Yes, Kalen agreed, but her spirit isn't admissible evidence. Serafina, I need to ask you to think very carefully. In those last weeks, did Isabella give you anything? Hide anything? A box? A letter? A key? Anything at all that she told you to keep safe? He was searching for the missing piece, the tangible link that would elevate Nate's digital findings into an irrefutable story of intent. Serafina's brow furrowed in concentration. She closed her eyes, mentally walking back through those dim, quiet rooms of Isabella's final days. She gave me things, jewelry to be given to her nieces, letters for her sister. Nothing secret. Everything was open. She paused. But there was something else. It was strange. Strange how? Kalen prompted, leaning forward. About a week before she passed, she was having a good day, clear-headed. She asked me to bring her the gown she wore to the Metropolitan Opera Gala 5 years ago, a beautiful, deep blue Oscar de la Renta. It was her favorite, Serafina recalled, her voice soft with memory. She held it, just touching the silk. Then she said to me, Sarah, this dress holds a beautiful memory. I want you to preserve it. Don't let it be sent away with the others. Keep it here. Keep it safe. And did you? Of course, sir. It's in a preservation garment bag in her private closet. Is there anything else she said about it? Serafina thought for a moment. Yes. She looked at me, and her eyes were so sharp that day. She said, "Memory is a key, Sarah. Don't ever forget that." Memory is a key. The phrase echoed in Kalen's mind. It was exactly the kind of cryptic clue Isabella would leave. She loved puzzles, literature, and hidden meanings. "Serafina," Kalen said, a surge of adrenaline cutting through him. "Please, take me to that dress." They walked into the master wing of the penthouse, a space Kalen had barely entered since Isabella's death. It was still her space, her scent faintly lingering in the air. Serafina opened the doors to a vast walk-in closet, a meticulously organized library of fashion. She went to a specific section and pulled out a long, white garment bag. They laid it carefully on the large chaise lounge. Kalen unzipped the bag, revealing the magnificent deep blue silk gown. It shimmered under the light, a painful reminder of a happier time, of Isabella radiant and full of life on his arm. "She told you to preserve it," Kalen mused, running his hand over the fabric. "She didn't say not to touch it." He began to examine the dress with the intensity of a forensic investigator. He checked the pockets. Empty. He felt along the seams, the hem, the intricate beadwork on the bodice. Nothing. Serafina watched him, her hands clasped. "Perhaps I misunderstood, sir." "No," Callan insisted. "Isabella never did anything without a reason. Memory is a key." He stopped. His fingers were on the lining, a heavier silk sewn inside the gown. He felt something, a slight thickness, an unnatural stiffness just below the left shoulder blade. It was no bigger than his thumb. With painstaking care, he used a small letter opener from Isabella's desk to snip the delicate stitches of the lining. He peeled the fabric back, and there, nestled in the cotton batting of the shoulder pad, was a tiny metallic object. It was a flash drive, a custom-made one, no bigger than a fingernail, designed to be inconspicuous. Kalen's hands trembled slightly as he held it. This was it. This was the ghost key. He took it to his office, Serafina following close behind. He plugged the tiny drive into a secure, air-gapped laptop that Nate had provided, one completely disconnected from any network. The drive opened to reveal a single password-protected folder. The password prompt was simple. "What is the key?" Kalen stared at the screen. He tried all the obvious things. Isabella's birthday, their anniversary, her pet names for him. Nothing. He looked at Serafina. "Memory is a key," he repeated aloud. "What memory? The dress? The opera gala?" He thought back to that night. The performance was Verdi's Nabucco. He remembered the standing ovation. But that wasn't a key. "What else happened that night?" he asked Serafina. "It was a beautiful evening," she recalled, "but Mrs. Beaumont was a little upset when she came home." "You both were." Kalen frowned, digging into his own memory. "Upset? Why?" And then it hit him, a flash of clarity so sharp it almost hurt. They had shared a box with Jeffrey and his ex-wife. During the second intermission, Jeffrey, slightly drunk on champagne, had launched into a tirade about a tech startup Kalen had invested in, calling it a fool's errand and mocking Kalen's judgment. Isabella had been furious at the disrespect, and they'd had a quiet, tense argument in the car on the way home. It was one of the first times she had ever said to him, "Kalen, Jeffrey does not see you as an equal. He sees you as a prize he has yet to win." He had dismissed it at the time as an overreaction. Now her words were chillingly prescient. He turned back to the laptop. On the password line, he typed the name of the tech startup Jeffrey had mocked that night. AQUITAS. He hit enter. The folder unlocked. It contained a handful of files, audio recordings, scanned documents, and a single text file named My Worries. Kalen clicked on the text file first. It was Isabella's voice, clear and precise, typed out in a digital diary. She detailed her growing suspicions about Jeffrey, noting his comments, his financial evasiveness, his insincere charm. She documented her fear that he would one day try to use Kalen's love for her against him. The final entry was dated the same day she had asked Serafina to save the dress. It read, I am leaving this here. I pray Kalen never has to find it, but if he does, it means my worst fears have come true. The audio files are from my phone. I started recording my calls with Jeffrey whenever Kalen was not around. He is a different man when he thinks no one of consequence is listening. Trust Serafina. She is my final guardian. With a deep sense of foreboding, Kalen clicked on the first audio file. It was a phone call between Isabella and Jeffrey from 8 months ago. Jeffrey's voice, stripped of its usual warmth, was cold and condescending. Isabella, for the 10th time, the returns from the Singapore fund are complex. It's not something you can track on a simple spreadsheet, Jeffrey's recorded voice said. Then send me the unabridged statements, Jeffrey. Isabella's voice, though weak, was firm. I am still a director of this family's estate. There was a sigh, then Jeffrey's chilling reply. Frankly, Isabella, given your condition, perhaps you should focus on your health and leave the business to those of us who will still be here next year. Kalen flinched as if struck. The cruelty of it was staggering. He played another file. This one was Jeffrey talking to Fiona Davenport. He must have pocket-dialed Isabella, and her phone had recorded the conversation. He's completely blinded by her illness, Jeffrey was saying. By the time she's gone, he'll be so lost he'll sign anything I put in front of him. The trust is the perfect vehicle. We'll use his love for her as the Trojan horse. It's poetic, really. Fiona's laugh, sharp and metallic, echoed from the speakers. Poetic and profitable. Kalen closed the laptop. The room was silent, save for the sound of his own ragged breathing. He looked at Serafina, whose eyes were filled with tears, not of sadness, but of vindication for the woman she had loved. The digital evidence from Nate was the weapon. But this was the soul of the crime. This was the proof of malice, the voice of the devil in his ear. They used my love for her as the Trojan horse, Kalen repeated, his voice a low growl. They're about to find out what's inside. The rage that filled Kalen was a white-hot, purifying flame. The grief remained, a permanent fixture in the architecture of his soul, but now it had a purpose. He wasn't just a victim. He was an avenger for Isabella's memory. He contacted Nate again. I have it, he said, his voice hard as steel. I have their intent, in their own voices. Now we build the trap. What's the plan? Nate asked. Leak it to the press? The SEC? No, Kalen said firmly. A leak can be spun. Denied. Buried in litigation. They tried to orchestrate a private betrayal. I'm going to give them a public execution. They want to put on a show with this trust? Fine. We'll give them the grandest show of their lives. The plan they devised was audacious, theatrical, and utterly ruthless. It appealed to Kalen's strategic mind and his newfound thirst for a very personal brand of justice. First, Kalen called Jeffrey. He adopted the persona of a man who had finally broken through his wall of grief and was now racked with guilt over the delay. Jeff, I am so sorry, Kalen said, his voice thick with contrived emotion. You were right. I was letting my sorrow get in the way of honoring her. I'm ready. I want to sign. On the other end of the line, Jeffrey's relief was almost audible. Kalen, that's wonderful news. Don't apologize for a thing. We're here for you. When and where? This was Kalen's opening. I've been thinking, Jeffrey, this is the most important thing I'll ever do. It's for Isabella. It shouldn't be done quietly in a penthouse. It should be a statement, a celebration of her life and the good this trust will do. What are you suggesting? Jeffrey asked, intrigued. I want to host a press conference, a gala event, Kalen announced. We'll invite the board of Beaumont Industries, key figures from the art and medical world she loved, and the major news outlets. We can announce the formation of the Isabella Beaumont Legacy Trust. I'll give a speech, talk about her vision, and then I'll sign the document right there, in front of everyone. Let the world see what we're doing. There was a brief silence. Kalen knew what Jeffrey was thinking. A public signing was dramatic, irreversible, and would make Kalen look like a philanthropic hero, leaving no room for him to back out. It was perfect for their plan. Kalen, that's a brilliant idea, Jeffrey said, his voice swelling with false admiration. It's bold. It's worthy of her. Fiona and I can handle all the arrangements. We'll book the ballroom at the Pierre, handle the press list. You just focus on your speech. Thank you, Jeff, Kalen said, the words tasting like ash. I knew I could count on you. As Jeffrey and Fiona sprang into action, orchestrating the event with feverish efficiency, Kaylin and Nate worked on the counter-offensive. Nate, the ghost in the machine, became the stage manager for their shadow play. The ballroom at the Pierre has a state-of-the-art AV system, Nate reported to Kaylin a few days later from his Brooklyn command center. 3 large projection screens behind the main stage. Their event team will run a presentation, a slideshow of Isabella, quotes, the Trust's mission statement. I've already breached their vendors' network. On your signal, I can hijack that feed. I can play anything I want on those screens. I want the audio from Isabella's drive, Kaylin instructed, and I want a visual component. Can you create a transcript that scrolls in real time with the audio? Big, bold letters. No one will be able to claim they misheard. Easy, Nate confirmed. What about the other evidence? The shell corporations? The money trail? I want that visualized, Kaylin said. Flow charts, simple damning graphics showing the money being funneled from Beaumont Industries into their offshore accounts. And then another chart showing how the Trust's leveraged assets would have followed the exact same path. I want it so simple a child could understand the theft. Nate's keyboard clicked furiously. Consider it done. I'll package it all into a single file. When you're on stage, you'll have a small wireless clicker in your hand, the kind used for presentations. It will look perfectly normal. One click advances the approved slideshow. A long press, 3 seconds, will be my signal. It will trigger my override. The show becomes ours. The final piece of the puzzle was Serafina. Kaylin asked to meet with her again. Serafina, at the event, I am going to insist that you be given a seat of honor in the front row, he told her. Jeffrey will object, but I will frame it as a tribute to your loyal service to Isabella. He'll have to concede to maintain his facade. Serafina looked alarmed. Sir, I don't belong in such a place. You are the only person who deserves to be there. Kaylin corrected her gently. You are the guardian of Isabella's honor. I need you to be there. When the truth comes out, I want Jeffrey and Fiona to see you. I want them to see the invisible woman who brought down their empire. Your presence will be the final turn of the knife. A quiet, fierce resolve settled in Serafina's eyes. I will be there, Mr. Beaumont, for her. The week leading up to the gala was a masterclass in deception. Kaylin played his part to perfection, meeting with Jeffrey to review his speech, a moving tribute to Isabella that was laced with double meanings only he understood. He spoke of trust, legacy, and hidden depths, and Jeffrey, blinded by his own arrogance, heard only what he wanted to hear. He saw a broken man ready to be sheared like a lamb. He had no idea he was speaking to the shepherd who was about to feed him to the wolves. On the evening of the event, Kaylin stood before the mirror in his penthouse, adjusting his black tie. He looked at the man in the reflection. The grief was still there, a shadow in his eyes, but it was now underscored by a diamond-hard resolve. He was not the man he was 2 weeks ago. He was an instrument of his late wife's will. He picked up the Mont Blanc pen, the one he had refused to use before. Tonight, it would not be a tool of surrender. It would be a weapon of judgment. He placed it in his jacket pocket, along with the small, unassuming presentation clicker. Downstairs, a car was waiting. The stage was set. The audience was arriving. The villains of the piece believed they were moments away from their greatest triumph. They were about to step onto a stage Kaylin Beaumont had built just for them, and the final act was about to begin. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a symphony of clinking crystal and hushed, important murmurs. Hundreds of New York's elite were in attendance. Financiers, art patrons, medical pioneers, and a throng of journalists, all drawn by the promise of a major philanthropic announcement from the reclusive Kaylin Beaumont. At a table in the front, Jeffrey Walsh and Fiona Davenport were glowing. They accepted congratulations from well-wishers, their faces masks of magnanimous success. Fiona, in a sleek, blood-red dress, looked like a predator who had finally cornered her prey. Jeffrey was the picture of gravitas and loyal friendship, occasionally glancing at Kaylin with a look of profound paternal pride. It was nauseating. Kaylin sat at the head table on the stage, a bottle of water and his prepared speech in front of him. He scanned the crowd, his gaze finding Serafina. As he'd insisted, she was seated in the front row, between the head of the Metropolitan Museum and a Nobel laureate doctor. She looked dignified and composed in a simple, elegant black dress Kalen had personally purchased for her. She met his eyes and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was all the reassurance he needed. Jeffrey approached the podium to begin the proceedings. His voice, amplified by the ballroom sound system, was smooth and resonant. He spoke of his 30-year friendship with Kalen, of Isabella's grace and beauty, and of the profound vision behind the Legacy Trust. It is a testament to Kalen's love and to Isabella's enduring spirit that he is turning his personal tragedy into a beacon of hope for millions. Jeffrey concluded, his voice thick with emotion. It is my solemn honor to be the steward of that legacy, and now I give you my dearest friend, Kalen Beaumont. A wave of respectful applause filled the room as Kalen walked to the podium. He placed his speech on the lectern and gripped its sides, the presentation clicker cool in his palm. He looked out at the sea of faces, at the flashing cameras, at the 3 massive screens behind him displaying a beautiful, smiling portrait of Isabella. "Thank you, Jeffrey," Kalen began, his voice quiet but clear, commanding immediate silence. "Thank you all for being here. Today is about legacy, what we leave behind, the stories that are told after we are gone." He spoke of Isabella, his voice filled with genuine love and sorrow. He shared anecdotes of her kindness, her wit, her passion for life. The speech was everything Jeffrey had reviewed, everything the audience expected. He was drawing them in, setting the emotional hook. "Isabella believed in truth," Kalen continued, his tone beginning to shift, a hard edge creeping into his voice. "She believed that true character is not revealed in the light, but in the shadows. She knew that some people build legacies, while others prefer to steal them." A nervous ripple went through the crowd. This was not in the approved speech. At their table, Fiona Davenport sat up straighter, her smile tightening. Jeffrey's expression flickered with confusion. Kalen looked directly at Jeffrey. "My wife was a brilliant woman, and she was worried. She worried that my love for her could be used as a tool, a Trojan horse to hide the most despicable kind of greed." He lifted his hand, the clicker held between his thumb and forefinger. He pressed and held it for 3 long seconds. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Behind him, the smiling portrait of Isabella vanished from the 3 giant screens. It was replaced by a black screen with stark white text, Aurelian Holdings, LLC, a Cayman Islands corporation. Below it, a flow chart appeared, showing a direct line from a Beaumont Industries subsidiary through a series of complex transactions to the offshore account. The final box showed the names of the sole beneficiaries, Jeffrey Walsh and Fiona Davenport. Gasps swept through the ballroom. Jeffrey went pale, his jaw dropping. Fiona looked as if she'd been struck by lightning. Then the audio began. It was Isabella's voice, weak but firm, filling the vast hall. "Then send me the unabridged statements, Jeffrey. I am still a director of this family's estate." Followed by Jeffrey's cold, cruel reply, echoing for all to hear. "Frankly, Isabella, given your condition, perhaps you should focus on your health and leave the business to those of us who will still be here next year." A wave of shock and disgust rolled through the audience. Journalists were scrambling, cameras flashing wildly. "This is a technical glitch," Jeffrey sputtered, rising from his seat. "Someone has hacked the system." But Kalen's voice cut through the chaos like a razor. "It's no glitch, Jeffrey. It's the truth." The screens changed again. Now they displayed the transcript of Jeffrey's pocket-dialed call with Fiona, the words appearing in sync with the audio. Jeffrey's voice. "He's completely blinded by her illness. By the time she's gone, he'll be so lost he'll sign anything I put in front of him." Fiona's voice, her sharp, metallic laugh now sounding hideous and damning. "The trust is the perfect vehicle. We'll use his love for her as the Trojan horse. It's poetic, really." The final slide appeared. It was a projection of the trust's own internal clauses, showing the legal pathway for Jeffrey to leverage the company's assets and funnel the billions into the very same shell corporations. The trap was laid bare for the world to see. Kalen stepped away from the podium. He picked up the heavy legal document for the trust and the Mont Blanc pen. He walked to the edge of the stage, his gaze locked on the horrified faces of Jeffrey and Fiona. "You wanted my signature, Jeffrey," Kalen said, his voice dripping with ice. "You wanted me to sign away my company, my legacy, and my wife's honor." He uncapped the pen. For a heart-stopping moment, it looked as if he might actually sign it, a final, insane act. The room held its breath. Instead, he turned to the audience. "The Isabella Beaumont Legacy Trust, as it is written here, is a fraud, a monument to greed conceived by the man I once called my brother." He then turned back to Jeffrey, his eyes burning with cold fire. "You will not have my signature." And in a move that shocked everyone, he didn't tear the document up. That would have been too simple. Instead, he held it out, and with the pen, he crossed out the entire signature block. Then in the blank space at the bottom of the page, he wrote 2 words in large, clear letters, "For Serafina." He then looked past Jeffrey, past the chaos, his eyes finding Serafina Jones. He gave her a small, sad smile of gratitude. At that moment, plainclothes security personnel, hired by Kalen and waiting in the wings, moved in. They flanked Jeffrey and Fiona, who were frozen in a state of utter shock and public disgrace. The game was over. The trap had sprung. The Trojan horse had been opened, and justice had marched out. The fallout from what the tabloids dubbed the Gala ambush was immediate and catastrophic for Jeffrey Walsh and Fiona Davenport. The public execution Kalen had staged was so undeniable, so thoroughly documented that there was no defense. The audio recordings, the financial charts, and the live testimony of hundreds of witnesses created a legal firestorm. Jeffrey and Fiona were arrested before they could even leave the hotel. The Securities and Exchange Commission, the New York Attorney General's office, and the IRS launched simultaneous investigations. Their assets were frozen, their law firm collapsed overnight, and their names became bywords for the most audacious corporate betrayal in recent memory. Faced with a mountain of evidence, they both eventually pled guilty to a slew of charges, including wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The long prison sentences they received were a quiet epilogue to the loud and public end of their careers. But Kalen Beaumont's work was not finished. The destruction of his enemies was not his ultimate goal. The restoration of his wife's honor was. In the weeks that followed, he systematically dismantled and rebuilt the corrupted corners of his world. He purged his boards of anyone with questionable loyalty to Jeffrey, promoting smart, hungry talent from within his own ranks. He brought in Nathaniel Chen, the digital ghost, as the head of a new, massively funded, in-house cybersecurity and risk analysis division, making him one of the highest-paid executives in the company. Most importantly, he established the real Isabella Beaumont Legacy Trust. This time, the document was drafted by a new, thoroughly vetted legal team. Its charter was transparent, its goals clear, and its governance ironclad. It was funded with an initial endowment of $1 billion from Kalen's personal fortune, with profits from Beaumont Industries to supplement it in perpetuity. Its mission was exactly what Isabella would have wanted: funding scholarships for promising young artists and underwriting cutting-edge, independent medical research. The board of this new trust was composed of trusted academics, doctors, and museum curators. But Kalen made one appointment that stunned the philanthropic world. He created a permanent, salaried position on the board of directors, a role designated as the legacy guardian. The first and only person he appointed to this position was Serafina Jones. She had tried to refuse, insisting she was just a housekeeper. "You were never just a housekeeper, Serafina," Kalen had told her, his voice firm but gentle. "You were the guardian of my wife's conscience. You were her final, most loyal soldier. This trust exists because of your courage. It is only right that you are here to ensure it always honors her true spirit. You are its heart." Months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Kalen and Serafina walked through the newly dedicated Isabella Beaumont Memorial Garden at the New York Botanical Garden, one of the first projects funded by the trust. The air was peaceful, filled with the scent of late-blooming roses. "She would have loved this," Serafina said, touching the petal of a deep red rose named Isabella's Courage. "The quiet, the beauty, the life growing here." "She is here," Kalen said, looking not at the flowers but at the quiet dignity of the woman beside him. He had lost his wife and in the process lost his best friend. But he had also found a new, profound kind of loyalty in the most unexpected of places. He had learned that true value isn't always found on a balance sheet or in a stock portfolio. Sometimes it's found in a quiet promise, a courageous whisper in a silent room. The grief for Isabella would never leave him, but it no longer felt like a suffocating void. It was now a presence, a guiding light. He had faced the ultimate betrayal and emerged not broken, but remade, with a clearer vision of his purpose. His legacy would not be the size of his fortune, but the strength of the truth he had fought to protect. A truth whispered to him by a black maid who had dared to speak when the whole world was silent. That single whisper, "Don't sign this," did more than just save a fortune. It saved a legacy. It proved that sometimes the most powerful voice in a room full of billionaires and lawyers isn't the loudest one, but the one that speaks the bravest truth. Kalen Beaumont thought he was signing a document to honor his wife, but her true honor was protected by the quiet courage of Serafina Jones, a woman whose loyalty couldn't be bought or intimidated. This story is a powerful reminder that intuition is real, that integrity is priceless, and that sometimes the greatest acts of heroism come from the people we see but never truly notice. If this story of trust, betrayal, and ultimate vindication moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who appreciates a story where justice is served cold. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story about the hidden dramas that unfold behind closed doors. Thank you for listening.